Okay, so lots of time for questions.
So anyone? Any question? No, I can make a comment.
He'll make something up.
The outlook you presented us is not very similar to the things that we usually read in the papers. You read the papers, I mean the newspapers, and even experts. Normally they are not properly experts, but the ones, the people that have studied, maybe graduate studies in the States, they will tell you that in the States most universities are private, that tuitions are very, very expensive, and so on. You read the papers, newspapers, normally you will find that tuition in private institutions has risen a lot, and you will read that a lot of people is indebted and can't pay the loans. Okay.
Yep.
That's the first thing.
Yep.
Second, I would like to ask you very basic data first, because I calculated that the government pays $9,000 per head per capita, but I didn't get it per student enrolled in the college or per student getting aid.
Enrolled.
20 million?
Enrolled in college.
20,
That's everybody.
the whole enrollment.
20 million is the total enrollment. That works out to 14 million full-time equivalent. And so the statistics I gave you on spending were per full-time equivalent. Less is spent on the part-time students, but if you aggregate it up, that's what it comes out to.
Okay, that's a lot of money compared with our quantities. And taking account of tuition fees being higher in the state, but not so much higher, I would say that the system in the state is much more generous than here.
In terms of the funding per student, I would believe that. We also spend more on health care. So we like to be extravagant. Your first point, I mean, there is a lot of misinformation in the U.S. About what college costs are like, what the level of indebtedness is like. And this is a function, I think, of who writes for the New York Times and who does the New York Times write for? The elite. And the elite send their children to the private schools where people are more likely to end up with very high levels of debt. Most of the high levels of loan debt, student loan debt, are from people who go to graduate school. Not just those who get a BA, but those who go on to become lawyers or doctors. They can end up with very high levels of debt, but they also end up with very high earnings, which compensates for it. So the newspaper accounts tend to focus on a very particular slice, but they're not focused on the people who are deciding, a person who's choosing whether to go to college or not is probably going to go to a community college where the tuition is, say, $1,000 a year, and they're very unlikely to take on substantial debt.
Do you have evidence in the States of the students coming from Do you have evidence in the U.S. of students coming from low-income households changing their behavior and going to these programs which are, for example, for 2 years, and if they receive a grant, they would change their behavior and maybe go to a BA or a 4-year programs, because in Spain we have that problem. So I think that grants can also help students to change, to act as if they had money enough to go to the college they would like to go.
Yes. So the I didn't talk about it, but the evidence on the effective price on college entry, it does also tend to not only increase the likelihood of going to college, but to shift people from 2-year colleges and into 4-year colleges. So, as you saw, the 4-year This also varies dramatically by state, however. So in some states like California, the two-year schools play a very important role in transferring students to the four-year schools. So the community colleges in California give people degrees which they then take to the California state universities, and they have 2 years of school done. So they're easily able to go on and get a BA. In other states, it's very difficult to do that. And it's more important that you start at a four-year school if you want to end up with a BA. So yes, the grants basically serve to compress the price between the 2 years and the 4 years and put more people on the margin of choosing between them.
Susan, I have two questions. The first one is, you say that, based on your evidence, the evidence you provided us about this program of 1981, it seems that $1,000 increased the enrollment rate by 5 points, 4 to 5 points. I would like to ask you if there is any evidence of non-linearities, so in the sense that increasing the grant to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 increases the effort in some part and then start to decrease the effort. And this is the first question. And the second one is...
Let me answer that one because I'll forget. I always forget the first one. So let me let me answer the first one. Yeah, you're right that was an average effect of the aid. Typically, when we do have a good experiment or quasi-experiment, we have one shift, and we're unable to tease out what the first $1,000 does versus the last $1,000. So it's not clear what's going on. So we don't have fine enough variation to get at that question. All right, now you can have your second one.
And the second one is, what's your opinion about the British system, the UK system, in which, as you mentioned it before, you pay just the difference between your future earnings against the average earnings of university people? Right.
So I and others have been advocating for an income contingent repayment system in the U.S. And it would be modeled on Australia's, on the UK system. Though they have shown that you can do it. Right? Right now, there is an option for people to opt into income contingent repayment in the U.S., but you can only do it if you've already shown signs of distress. So if your income's quite low, you're having trouble paying your loans, then you can move into it. And remember I said complexity matters. It's a complicated process getting moved into it, and relatively few people do it. Probably the best system would be one in which people opt out of it. So they're automatically put into an income-based repayment system. And if they want to pay at a more aggressive rate, they can do so, but make that the default. It's got a lot of good economic properties. It means that you've got an automatic buffer against earning shocks. It lets you extend the payment period into, an education pays off over an entire lifetime. Right, you get enhanced earnings right up until you retire because of your education. So typically, we pay for capital goods over the life that they're good. Right, we don't pay. We don't take out a 30-year mortgage for lunch for a sandwich, but we do for a house because a house is going to be useful to us for 30 years. So it makes sense that the payment period would be longer than 10 years. For a student loan, and it would help to make the payments more bearable.
I also have two questions.
One at a time.
Okay. Both questions are a comparison between the situation in the States and in Spain. One of the questions is related to the lesson 3 about the academic incentives that appear to be meant aid effectiveness. And so in Spain, the government, the education minister tried to introduce these very tiny academic incentives in the aid, and there was it produced a very high opposition a very high ideological opposition to this measure. So I want to know if in the States this idea is well accepted or not. Or
So in the federal aid programs, there are not incentives attached to the grants. So the Pell Grant, for example, is just, I mean, the conditions are very low. I mean, you need to be getting a 2.0, I think, maybe a 1.0 on your, so you have to be showing up and making some progress. But where we see these programs are in the states. So quite a few of the states have introduced these programs, and people tend to like them. The people who are eligible for them, their parents are often voters, so who gets good test scores and good grades tends to be upper income kids, so they like these programs quite a bit. You know, I think they're always politically more palatable if they're introduced in the context of an increase in aid, right? So if you are layering a new program on top of an existing program, here's extra money, that's going to be more politically popular than if you take an existing program and cut a whole lot of people out of eligibility. What was the nature of the opposition? So what was the content of the opposition?
People in the education.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, he still had a second question. You're not going to get your second question?
Same question, yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's another question because
Related to this?
Spain looks like another country. It was not introduced. The conditions are already introduced, are already there, and I would say that it's much more hard than the ones indicated by the number of courses to take and acceptable grades. Now, or up to now, conditions were that you make the whole year, more or less. In very difficult grades, very difficult studies, you can fail in 1 or 2 matters, but in most studies you can't fail. You fail, the grant is retired. And what you mean is tiny condition, at least one expression of the minister was raising the grade from 5 to 6.5. 5 is the normal.
Okay, so you have a 10-point system? 10 point, okay.
10 point is the
All right.
maximum. But 6.5, above 6.5, there are no more than 20% of students. That means that the conditions the minister intended to introduce was that 8 grants were conditions to be among the 20.
Right.
So
So the design details matter here. So
that is very much, not a tiny thing. And the opposition is not ideological. A lot of people were, of course, damned by it.
So these programs that we have this evidence from, the conditions are such that, you know, say 60% of students would meet them, right? So much higher. So it might be that you need to get a B average in your courses. It might mean actually in the the experiments that they did in the community colleges, you needed a C. You needed to be enrolled full-time and get a C. And the effects were pretty large, right? So, you know, we do have scholarship programs for very high-performing students. So, you know, there are various federal programs, scholarship programs that are for people who have very high SAT scores and very high grades and so forth. But it's a tiny group. I didn't even talk about them because it's so small. These are programs that most students are eligible for. And the evidence is from programs that were put on top of existing programs. So people were still getting their other grants, but they were getting an additional $1,000 if they got a C and they were enrolled full-time. So that's where the evidence is coming from. It's not from taking the entire structure of aid as we know it and conditioning it on a certain set of grades. It's a marginal effect. throw it over.
Yes, well, my question it was about the general idea of introducing or not, not about the specific things
Right.
or the specific characteristics, because if it's 6.5 or 5 or whatever, no, but it's about most people in this discussion that it was 1 year ago, I think, they say no, you don't need to introduce any distinction. All the grants are for all the people. And also in the Spanish university, there is a general grant because it's subsidized by 80%, I think. So
Right.
everybody receives a 80% grant, no, in the university. But the second question is about, I work for a regional government, so we introduce plans or like aids or in the high school for students to drive them to the university, no? To the excellent students, we call, no, the excellent high school or program. So my question is if there are some kind of programs in the States, and if they have, do you have a study, or you or another study of these programs?
So I only talked about the studies that we had good evidence from, and so I didn't talk about those studies. There are, also this was focused on the college entry margin and not high school preparation so much. We have a set of programs, they're called the TRIO programs, which are located in high schools and are intended to encourage low-income students to prepare for college and go to college. One of them has had, they tend to be quite expensive because, you know, they have tutoring and they've got a lot of other components. They take people on field trips and that sort of thing. There was one randomized trial of one of these programs called the Upward Bound program, and it found zero effect. So there was like, maybe there might have been for one subgroup of people there might have been a positive effect, but overall the effect was essentially zero. Now that doesn't mean these programs can't work, but at least as they were structured in the US at that time, they didn't seem to be doing much. Now there have been, more recently, there have been randomized trials of various lighter touch mentoring programs, you know, text messages to students, right? Sending them text messages to remind them to fill out their financial aid form, to remind them to file their school applications. We lose a lot of students, you know, complexity matters, again, so we lose a lot of, especially low-income students, somewhere in the process of applying for college and applying for aid. They miss some deadline, right? You know, parents like me, they're making sure all the deadlines get met, right? They're filing the forms for the kid. If you didn't go to college yourself, you're not playing that role for your child, and the kid's on their own. And these mentoring programs, as I said, these are not like high touch. They're in the room with, they're sending them text messages, reminding them to get stuff done. And they seem to be cheap, and they seem to be effective in getting people through those milestones. Now those programs are not about improving academic preparation, right? You're not going to improve somebody's academic preparation with a text message, but for helping them through the logistics, it seems to be useful.
Yes, you've mentioned that you have to pay back your loan within 10 years of having finished. Is that irrespective of your financial situation? Let's say you're on a dole, you've finished your degree and you haven't found a job, and do you have to pay back?
The federal loans have, the ones that come from the federal government have various conditions that if you're unemployed or something like that, you can get a forbearance, they call it. So you can temporarily have the payment suspended. And then it might take 15 years instead.
Because in the UK, you don't start paying until you reach a certain threshold. Even if you're working and if your income is quite low, you don't pay anything back until you earn a certain amount.
That is not automatic in the US. So you would need to, complexity matters, you would need to, you know, go and get the form and fill out the form and send it to your lender and get from the IRS, you would need to get your tax returns that show that your income is low, and get access to the program. So I think if it were automatic, it would play a more effective insurance role. But as it is, when you're in financial distress is probably the time when it's most difficult to jump through all these hoops. And we have very low enrollment rates in these programs right now.
Any other question?
Yo puedo preguntar más tiempo si hay tiempo.
Well, I think we have time for one other question, because Susan Dynarski is going to have another seminar at 1:30 in Zenfi.
You're working me very hard. You can come see me again. Double feature. Charter schools.
We have time. Yeah, we have time for another question. Yeah.
Okay, it's a very simple question. I just finished high school. I want to enter college. Suppose I am able to fulfill this form. So I can ask for money, and this money is conditioned to my income, or to the income, to my parents' income.
Parents' income, if you're a young person, yep.
Yeah. If we are very poor, I have the right to an unconditioned aid. What you said there, need aid.
Need-based aid, yes.
And would you take account of my grades in high school?
No,
No.
no.
So if I am poor, high school graduate, I have right to money. How much money?
Pell Grant is about $5,000 a year for the poorest students.
To pay fee and tuition.
And living, yeah.
Suppose I come from a rural, far away, sparsely populated area, have a right to some expenses?
You know, they do calculations of what's the cost of attendance for a given student, and there are travel expenses that are in there, but the 5,000 that's basically what the maximum looks like, is the Pell Grant. Then there's other scholarships sometimes as well, but a lot of people work in the U.S. while they're going to school.
After 1 year, I am requested to present my grades?
These programs here, they're not, these are state programs. So the Pell Grant, 5,000 need-based. So for example, state of Georgia had a program for many years where if you got a B in high school, then you could get tuition and fees waived at the public universities in the state, and community colleges in the state. And then the money you got from the federal government you could then use to live on, because this was just, you know, for living expenses. So to get this extra money, you needed to have a B in high school and then keep a B in college. But so these are, it differs state by state where these exist. But the federal programs tend to be just need-based.
So that at the end, as you said, my chances of completing college are less than the median, than the mean.
For low-income students?
For low
yes, yes. The dropout rate for low-income students is about 67%. For high-income students, it's about 30%. You know, for our low-income students, if you look in the U.S. at low-income students, I mean, you go back to kindergarten, right? You start seeing lower test scores. You start seeing them having to repeat a grade. Then they're less likely to graduate high school. They're going to have lower grades. They're less likely to go to college. They're more likely to drop out. So you lose them at every step of the educational process. And among those is dropout.
But the probability of completing college is conditioned to getting to college.
Of course. Yep. Yep. So right now we've got, you know, I gave you that figure, like say 30% of young people get a bachelor's degree in the U.S. If you're from the poorest quarter of the income distribution, it's about 9%.
Yeah, sure. Just one issue, if you want to answer about the scholarships here in Spain. But it was from 5.5 to 6.5. So the condition was already in place before, so it was not 5 but 5.5. And then the number of people who got scholarships at the university level has increased in the last year. So it went up from 290,000 scholarships to 310,000. So it does seem that increasing the threshold has not reduced the number of students getting the scholarship. Yeah,
Do you have any evidence on whether there's been grade inflation?
That's a point. Now we are thinking, that's a very good point. We're thinking of this possibility. This is a possibility. So we don't have any analysis about this, because those people who are from 5.5 to 6.5 do not pay taxes. They do not pay tuition fees, any tuition fees, and those who get more than from 6.5 to onwards, they do not pay tuition. They got some money, extra money. Yeah. That we have to do run some analysis, because one possibility is the grade inflation. Yeah.
Do you have information on the grades from the schools? Or is that you'd have to go to the colleges?
Sure. The average grade has gone up from those getting the scholarship from 7.3 to 7.7. So it's a huge increase, a very important one. But we do not know if this really reflects a higher student achievement, higher competence, or is
higher complaining,
or higher complaining, or both of them.
Yeah.
They are not excludable.
Yep.
The rate of completion of people with grants here is much higher than the rate of completion of the new people. I mean, in 5, 6, the people with grants finish college in 6 years. Maybe grant paper. The difference in the States.
Yeah, you're right.
So if the dropout is so high, then that money is really gone down the drain, because if you've only gone to university for about a year or so.
The evidence on whether there is some evidence that each year increases your earnings. It's not like you have to finish in order to get the increase. I mean, we're doing some analysis that relates number of credits, courses you take, to earnings, and you can even see it per credit. So if you go to college and take a few courses, it looks like it can have some impact on your I mean, if you go and immediately flunk out of everything, you don't even get any credits. That seems like an unmitigated bad, right? But if you acquire a year's worth of courses, it looks like that does something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the seminar. It has been pretty nice.